You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This podcast is sponsored by Panduit, infrastructure for a connected world. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Keri Roberts, and my guest today is Jeff Paliga, the Director of Business Development of Network Infrastructure and Data Center at Panduit. I want to welcome you back to the show, Jeff. You were with us in episodes 61 and 69, and I'm thrilled to have you here with us again today.
Thanks, Keri. Third time's a charm. I'm glad to be here as well and looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of what we spoke about in those last two episodes. So if you haven't listened to them, I highly encourage that you do. There were two case studies that your company did, one for CenterPoint Energy and the other for the Vatican Apostolic Library. But before we get into those, I'd love for you to tell us why you personally think physical infrastructure is important and such a crucial piece to any network design.
Oh, Keri, thanks. I absolutely love this question because it's right in our wheelhouse. So just I'd like to maybe quickly define physical infrastructure for our audience. Sometimes it's also referred to as layer one in the OSI model, the Open Systems Interconnection model. So if you think of all the cables and the connectors, the electrical systems inside the data center, that's really the physical infrastructure. So at Panduit, we take that criteria just a little bit further with the inclusion of all the different elements that support all the active IT equipment. For example, we include racks, cabinets to support and secure the IT assets. We also include cable pathways, power distribution units, thermal containment, grounding and bonding, labeling, and all the enclosures and patch panels and patch cords to round out that list. So it's pretty comprehensive on layer one. There's a total of 7 layers in that model I referred to, the OSI model. So each one has to be designed and planned and installed and operated correctly. So basically the essential applications, which is what this is all about, they will run properly. So I guess you could say the proverbial weakest link syndrome of any of these elements could be detrimental. So fortunately, physical infrastructure is truly the foundational element because of for many years, there's been high quality designs and inherent performance levels. We're very forgiving to some less than you would say maybe desirable deployments. There's also a significant amount of headroom or bandwidth built in, which in many cases was not threatened or exhausted. So all this type of independent relationship of the network design and facilities functions were able to kind of coexist relatively well. But today, the change to your question, the changes the applications, the bandwidth performance, and newer network architecture types have changed. There's a need for a more thorough and comprehensive long-term view that includes every aspect of the data center so it can deliver and maintain that performance level. So newer architectures have moved from, example, 3-tier to 2-tier. There's a lot more traffic inside the data centers. In fact, a lot of people think as much as 85% of the traffic will still remain inside data centers, what they call east to west traffic. So there's bandwidth constraints. So customers today are looking at this more collectively, looking at the IT and the facility side. They don't want to become the proverbial weakest link in that business model. So to close out on it, the physical infrastructure is a complementary part to the network design. And it's really important because if you think of how many times things such as space, power, cooling, or bandwidth has basically prematurely been depleted and shortening the life cycle of the data center asset and facilities, that results in additional cost and expense. So if it's done well, if it's planned out well, the deployment includes physical infrastructure, it extends the life cycle, the assets, and it defers some unnecessary costs. So basically, looking at it all collectively across the board is really the proper way to go. Otherwise, you do become that weak link that brings things down. So long answer, but very passionate about that topic. So thank you.
Yeah. And, in relation to your CenterPoint Energy case study, when you're doing the network design, part of it is it included alerts. And I'm curious, how were they able to avert additional financial costs by being alerted when something was going wrong with their infrastructure? And how do these alerts work?
Yeah, so CenterPoint's, again, great example. They've deployed basically 2 key Panduit solutions. One was our Smart Zone offering, and the other was SnapSense. And so the example I'll give to your question is really around our SnapSense solution, which includes a mix of hardware, software, and an effective breadth of sensors, right? So this solution is typically recognized to help identify and monitor and control thermal and cooling conditions, but it also has some extended capabilities for additional environmental functionality. So for CenterPoint, there are 2 separate but similar situations that would have caused some additional costs and losses if our solution did not detect some challenges coming ahead. So as most of our audience is aware, humidity is not good for IT equipment, and there are a lot of sensitive electronics inside the data center. So within one of their primary data centers, our network of humidity sensors was able to provide a proactive notification based on some preset thresholds that were going to be exceeded. So this alert came through the system automatically. It was shared both with IT and the facilities group. And this is important because it helped them more accurately assess and then resolve the issue as opposed to having disparate troubleshooting systems, things being done in a vacuum. So they were able to adjust and make the corrections ahead of time and continue to provide those seamless services in the primary data center. Similarly, in the second situation, it was a newer building that was really thought to be acceptable for a smaller IT deployment. So during the initial installation, because our Synapse system was installed and the sensors were up and running, the space was being fitted out, and it was quickly determined again that humidity was much too high on day one, and it required some additional provisions that were done at a lower cost and expeditiously before the IT gear came in. So that new gear likely would have been damaged or lost and replaced, driving up some costs. So basically 2 examples, very similar. We're having the data upfront, proactively receiving those notifications. We're able to avert any significant costs and outages.
So you're kind of testing the humidity and all of those things as part of the initial design before you kind of put everything in as well.
It can be, yeah. It's a really good point. It can be. Our solutions can go into a retrofit environment because they're non-intrusive. The sensor network I'm referring to is wirelessly based, so they can put these things in a very quick manner and start pulling data quickly. So that can go into an existing environment. Or in the other example, as equipment's being fit out or facilities are being fit out, that infrastructure can go in again. It's non-intrusive. You can start pulling data. You can have things around security, thermal, power, and cooling ahead of time. So it can go in new environments, greenfields, if you will, and brownfields retrofit as well.
That's great. And before working with you, CenterPoint's DCIM solution was not integrated with any power or environmental data. So gathering such data was quite time consuming. How were they doing it before, and how do they get that data now with Panduit?
So this is pretty common, I guess, the scenario. So before, they really weren't getting a lot of data to begin with, right? Especially to what they're getting now. And that's not uncommon. A lot of customers and partners are kind of intuitive. They have a feeling that something's not operating right, or they have an idea that might not be there, but they can't really base it on data, right? To go in and actually have some sound practices behind it. So in many cases, like CenterPoint, this data is captured or stored and then retrieved in a real manual process. And by manual, I'm talking about people or persons physically walking a site, for example, and writing or typing down the information. And then hopefully, and typically, and again, hope is not a strategy, but typically you're hoping that information does get entered into some type of a spreadsheet, and it is saved or called up after a problem arises. So you can see with that model, there's some inherent risk in this process, which really, by the way, again, is very prevalent in many situations. So people leave jobs, leave companies, they change positions, files get lost, things don't get updated. And if you're running multiple data centers, this scenario becomes even more complicated. So our Synapse and Smart Zone systems provide that real-time data. They proactively are set with predetermined thresholds. They send the alerts before the losses or damages occur. And so today, these alerts and notifications and reports can be sent through, the network. They can be performed within, it can be accessed or performed within the proper groups, proper personnel take action. So the key is really getting the proper data into the appropriate hands, which is really powerful. So now they get more data than they ever had before, and it's done on an automated system through a series of hardware and software that's shared and open amongst others, and not somebody's spreadsheet that maybe gets lost or deleted, or someone forgets the password to get into it.
Well, like you said, in this case study, you're showing a lot of financial savings. You're showing that the data is much more accurate and much more helpful than it was before. In our other case study that we had talked about was with the Vatican Library project that you conducted. And on that one, there was so much focus on its uniqueness in regards to its location and contents. Obviously it's much more historical in nature. But were there any similar business benefits related to other IT or data center projects you did for them that were realized as well?
Yeah, so you hit it on the head, Keri. I really enjoyed that podcast we did, and that continues to be a great story just based on the environment. So as you said, it's very unique, and we're very proud of that. But as unique as it was, and it continues to be, there certainly are and still remain some challenges and benefits that are more commonly shared in more of our traditional deployments or environments. So a few of those examples I'd like to share with are really speed to deploy. That's pretty common with any of our data center project or IT projects. Folks want to get their production environments up and running as soon as possible. And so really being able to quickly and efficiently install, test, and turn up the production environment carried over to almost any type of environment. So our ability, really, because of the breadth of our product and what we provided, that really ensured that reliability and the fit and reduce the deployment speed as much as 30% to ultimate solution. So you can imagine if they had to go to multiple vendors and partners and suppliers for all the different product categories, that adds a lot of cost, inherent time. So we're able to simplify that and expedite that as well. Like I said, in some cases, less than 30% to a competing solution. Also, very similar to other data centers, this facility was not going to remain static. These are very dynamic environments. So we include the ability to scale for future bandwidth network requirements, if you will, by including high density fiber cabling and connectivity product sets. Very hard to predict the future, but we had enough insights and thought into the future that we knew things were going to change. So we're able to deploy that from day one. And then lastly, really from operational, after you're installed, operational costs are huge top of mind. So from that perspective, we were able to deploy a good amount of intelligence to help monitor and control and communicate on things like the facility's power situation, some security, give it a cooling profile image, and the connectivity status. So again, these environments are well protected regardless of where they're at. And they're very important, any type of data center. So as unique as the Vatican Library is for most of our deployments, there was a fair amount of common business similarities that we successfully addressed in that environment as well as many others.
And I think a lot of people who work on preserving history don't always think that something that's new or technology-based is always the best things. But one of the things you mentioned last time was that because the technology that you used from a scanner perspective, they were able to scan at a very high level. And one of the things that it did for the library, in a sense, in my opinion, was act like an archaeological adventure, meaning there were multiple writings that were found on one page that weren't ever seen before because they couldn't be seen by the human eye alone, which is really exciting. So first, I'd love for you to talk about the technology that does that. And then second, of course, we all want to know what was found, what was written on those other pages.
So, boy, Keri, I hope not to disappoint here. So this is a great question, but a tough question. So this question certainly goes beyond my level of expertise, right? The scanning piece, and I don't know all the details or every detail of the scanning process. But what I can tell you is that it is of the utmost advanced technology out there today. In fact, other vertical markets, for example, are utilizing that as well. I know there is a pretty strong mix of some processes and some expertise that are applied. There's some inclusion of some ultraviolet that gets introduced into the process. It's an amazing process that I don't fully grasp. But what I can tell you on that, beyond that, the additional information that they are extracting out of these multi-layer pages, the images and the findings are driving a bigger need for more capacity for storage and security than originally planned. As you can imagine, as you said, it's an archaeological adventure, what's being discovered. So, again, our infrastructure was well planned, well implemented. We didn't know what the future included, but we knew it was going to be changing. So, the system today has been serving really well. It's been handling the additional inputs and storage and data seamlessly as the data continues to rise. So as far as what they found, with that being said, I really can't comment. And I'm sorry because I don't know, because the discovery is really currently going on today. So, as they continue to go through and find, they're piecing these stories together and these relics together. I'm sure there's plenty of curious people filled with anticipation, including myself, but I guess we'll have to wait to see how it finishes out. But the exciting thing is they are extracting it. And I'm sure once we have that, maybe that can become another case study in its own of what was found on these hidden pages.
Yeah, and you were saying last time on this case study that part of what you all did too is people can now have access to this online. Like, how can they kind of see all this stuff online or interact with it, especially in a way they haven't done before?
Yeah, if you did, I'm not sure if I missed this last time, but on the Google lookup, if you did the Vatican Library, again, there's a lot of history there, there's science there's all sorts of different elements that one might not know. But if you did a lookup on the Vatican Library, there's a link will come up. They'll give you access to the public. You can log in. You can start looking at these artifacts by type. It's a pretty strong search engine. The library continues to grow as every day they digitize more of these findings. So, I think that's probably the quickest and easiest way to get in there, because I know there's other resources that are linked to that, but that will get you probably in the right direction to start finding what's actually in there from a firsthand experience.
Now, of course, the one question we ask all of our guests on the show is, where do you see technology going within the next year? And you answered this before. This is your third time here with us. And so I wanted to adjust it slightly and ask you, where do you see technology helping in areas it really hasn't as much yet?
Yeah, boy, that's a really interesting case. I mean, I'm thinking of our current situation with a lot of people, working from home now, remote. It's really changed a lot of the business model as far as what maybe wasn't thought of how people could work remotely, or what types of jobs couldn't be done remotely utilizing technology. I think that's probably the biggest top of mind for me right now, that the technology that's put in place and the technology that's coming is really expanding our reach into so many different markets and vertical markets, for example, that we didn't think of. So things like healthcare, remote healthcare, yes, we've been hearing about that for years, but I think, again, currently, we're seeing that put in place where hospitals and testing centers are being put up quickly, the amount of data being secured, obviously, and the amount and the criticality of that data is being pulled seamlessly from all parts of the world. So things like edge compute, I'm not sure if we might have mentioned that last time, edge compute and what that looks like. I think having just basically the edge or the infrastructure available is something that's going to allow the new technologies to ride over the top of that without question. And maybe one of the things, maybe not such a comment on technology, but maybe just a comment, when we talk about, again, the physical infrastructure piece, maybe an analogy that ties back to that, being, ubiquitous to handle any types of technology. I look at an analogy like our homes. If everybody thinks of their homes or they think of physical infrastructure differently, if you think about the wiring behind the walls, right, we really don't think about unless there's a problem. And that's kind of how like physical infrastructure works. You just want it to work and not have to think about it. But every time you bought a new phone or TV or an appliance or computer, you had to rewire all those wires behind your walls. That would be really expensive and really disruptive and costly. So whatever technology is coming down the pipe, having a sound infrastructure put in place is huge. And then secondly, because you don't want to have to change it out and swap it. And secondly, having some level of a dashboard. The other analogy is, once an infrastructure is in, it'd really be good to find out the status and the health check of that, right? It's like having a car without a dashboard. You might not know how much fuel you have or your tire pressure, what direction you're going. You need some type of dashboard to see how things are performing. So again, your question about technology, I think we look at it from the physical infrastructure. We design and build the best infrastructure that can handle the technologies today and give you a seamless path into the future, regardless of what vertical market or technology is put out there. So that's what we look at, is making sure it's installed properly, it's going to last over a long period of time, and you have some type of reporting mechanism to give you an update on how its status or health is.
Now, where can people learn more about what we talked about today, or if they want to connect with you to ask questions on any of the case studies or infrastructures in general?
Great. The fastest and easiest is at panduit.com. That'll get you into our website, and inside the website, there's a whole host about who is Panduit, our product sets, our solutions. We have customer and partner tools in there. We have some of the case studies and the data that we talked about today, and additional, a lot more. I've spoken only to maybe one portion of Panduit's business. We have many, many different business models and business units that cover so many different verticals. I think what we hear quite often is, gee, I didn't know Panduit did all that. And so I think it's obviously worth going in there and looking at panduit.com and finding out more about us.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We always enjoy having you on the show and for giving us a little deeper dive into your case studies. And we look forward to learning more from you in the future.
Thanks, Keri. I appreciate it.
If you like this episode or have a question, join the discussion on Twitter at Ingram TechSol with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, hosted by Keri Roberts. This episode was sponsored by Panduit. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production with Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today on your favorite podcast platform.